All right, so we're doing the story of David, and we're focusing on the spiritual side of things, actually, as well as um, as well as the battles, and uh, there's a couple other people that we're going to be introduced to tonight. But so far, what we have learned about David. Okay, David was a poor shepherd boy. Okay, and he was from Bethlehem of Judah, and Bethlehem is part of the of Judah. Okay, and he was raised in the Jewish faith and patriotic to his country, Israel. And just backing up to the idea of the shepherd boy, more than likely, uh, he he lived kind of like the Bedouins still live, um, in tents with made out of goat skins, and so it's kind of it'll be kind of important a little bit later that he is coming from this poor background. All right, and he had much strength and courage. All right, based upon his faith in God, and like say his loyalty to God, and loyalty and patriotic to his country, remembering that the country, the government, and the religion, the Jewish religion, basically it was all one and the same. I mean, the country followed the rules from the Torah, and so and then David. All right, David, of course, last week, um, he defeated Goliath against all odds, and God was with him. So we're going to kind of focus on that idea that God was with him as we go through some things tonight, because all is not glorious and all is not totally well with him tonight. Okay. So I'm going to first, this is going back to chapter 16 for just a little bit, but it's important as we go along. So 1 Samuel 16, 21, and then 23. And David came to Saul, and this is King Saul, and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. Now, that's very important in the eyes of David as we go along, that David was loyal and loved King Saul. All right. Now, uh, this other and whenever the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, David took a harp and played on it. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Um, and so this two parts to this that are significant. Uh, one is that this is where we learn that David played the harp. So he was growing up as a shepherd boy. He tended the sheep and whatnot. Um, and remember, he he played with and became very accurate with his slingshot, so to speak. But he also played the harp, and as we know, David also wrote many of the Psalms. Okay. Now, the other part of this, and we're going to see it even more, and it's going to say the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, King Saul. Now, we have to talk about this because we now have Jesus. We have Jesus' teachings, and we now know that there is no evil coming from God, because God is love, and there's no the evil. It does not come from God. Evil in this world comes from humankind. But the belief, that was the belief system back then. They didn't have Satan or the devil. Everything was God. So whether it was evil, whether it was something good, it came from God. So once again, we have to keep that in mind, because we're going to be talking about the evil spirit of coming on Saul a good bit. All right, so now we're going to go. We're going to identify these persons, so to speak. We didn't read all of the chapters leading up to David, and there are some interesting stories about King Saul. But what we know here, what's significant, okay, is that Saul was the first king of Israel. Or he was anointed and advised by the prophet Samuel according to God's laws, which were the Ten Commandments and the other Mosaic laws and whatnot. But that is how the kings in ancient Israel, that is how it worked. They received their advice from the prophets, and the prophets received their messages directly from God. However, you're going to see something a little differently colored in a little bit. Okay, and the other thing to remember is that Saul was a Benjamite, okay, from the tribe of Benjamin. And so when we get to, we're going to be comparing David and Saul, and one of the major factors here is that the tribe of Benjamin was very small. Okay, it wasn't very big. The Benjamites were fighters, though. They were very excellent warriors and whatnot. But Judah, the tribe of Judah, and David was of the tribe of Judah, was much bigger, had a lot more influence, and so again, that will come into play. But what happened? Okay, King Saul and Samuel, the prophet Samuel, had a falling out, and it's a neat story if you want to go read it, because King Saul went out to battle, and the prophet had told him that that's what he had to do, but and they had set up a situation where the prophet Samuel was to return to Saul in the battlefield in 7 days. And so let's suffice it to say, King Saul had his orders from Samuel. And what happened was that Samuel didn't return within the 7 days. King Saul took everything into his own hands, didn't really do anything that bad, except he disobeyed the command that Samuel had given him, which was and that, of course, that represented following God's commandments. So King Saul and Samuel broke off on account of that. And the last time, that's where we saw and where I said it was out of order when Samuel anointed David, but um, it doesn't matter. Um, it means that David was destined to be king, but after this incident, Samuel left, is out of the picture, and King Saul is doing his thing, whatever he wants to do, even though Samuel told him that he wasn't king anymore. Okay, so King Saul continued warring against the Philistines, and at this point in time, he was not being advised by the prophet because they had that falling out. And in many respects, it does say that Saul believed he was following God, but you're going to see a change in his character here soon. So it's King Saul, and the other character that's very important here is Jonathan. Jonathan was King Saul's son. Okay, and Jonathan was a excellent warrior in the king's army. All right, and so we're going to start off here with 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. That was after Goliath. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because Jonathan loved David as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and his bow and his girdle. Okay, now that all sounds kind of whatever. However, let's clear this up. First of all, when it says Jonathan's spirit was joined to David, all right. When Jonathan saw this brave young man, David, defeating Goliath and winning the battle against the Philistines, his spirit was joined to David. In other words, he became very proud and very fond of Jonathan. And also, Jonathan himself, as we said, was a brave and strong warrior. Now, as far as giving his robe and his garments, I hope you didn't have this vision of Jonathan just stripping naked and whatnot. No. That's not the way. That's not the way it worked. And I put this picture in here to remind you, we've talked about this before. Men back then would normally wear several layers of clothes. Okay. And Jonathan, being royalty, so to speak, sure had an extra layer on. But basically, I'll put this picture in here, is they all have the simple white garment, kind of like just a total undergarment. But you notice this guy has a robe. Oh, okay. And we see one robe. He's probably got two, maybe three. I don't know. So it was nothing. He would took the robe off. That's fine. And then there was another one underneath. And then when it says his girdle, if you see the belt right there on that man, that is what the girdle was. And so basically, Jonathan was paying homage to David, the poor shepherd boy who had defeated Goliath, and they formed a covenant. Now, a covenant, it's just a standing agreement between two or more persons. And their covenant was basically friendship, loyalty, love, and peace. And, you know, just just an aside here, because you probably have heard it, but this was not a homosexual relationship. Okay. All right. So we have King Saul, Jonathan, and David. Now we're going to go, and I think George is going to help me um, read these scriptures.
And David went out wherever Saul sent him and was victorious, so that Saul appointed him over the men of war, and he found favor in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass, as they returned, when David came back from the slaughter of the Philistines, women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing, dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with cymbals, and were rejoicing. And the women sang as they played and laughed, saying, Saul has slain by thousands, and David by tens of thousands. And Saul was very wroth, and this saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul began to envy David from that day forward.
And therein lies the plot. Saul became jealous of David. Now, you notice it said back there that Saul, this is what the women had said, Saul has slain by thousands and David by tens of thousands. Okay, this is an example of amplification. And amplification is it's a literary device, and that essentially it's exaggeration. Okay, and you will find this in almost all Near Eastern writings, because Near Eastern storytellers were not interested in preciseness, so to speak. They didn't care like we do. Well, we want to know, was it 101 people that got killed, or was it 102 or whatever? But that's not, and that's even now in the Near East writers. That's what they do. So that is what we call amplification. And what the women actually were saying is that Saul had slain many Philistines, but David had slain many times more. David slew more, much more than Saul. And of course, that irritated Saul. And so now we get into what starts happening here to David.
And it came to pass after some days that an evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of his house. And David was playing music in his presence, as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul threw the javelin, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded it twice. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him and had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander over 1,000. And he went out to war and came in before the people. And David was a man of understanding in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he was exceedingly wise, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out to war and came in before them.
Now, do we see the plot unfolding here? Saul made David the commander over 1,000 because he wanted David in the front lines, because David just might get killed in the front lines. Now, so And we're going to see a little more of this. Let's see. 16. So we're not going to read all of the stories, but that was the first time. Okay, he sent him out there hoping, well, I'll get rid of David that way. All right. So then we go to verse 17, and Saul said to David, "Behold, my elder daughter Nadab, I will give her to you to wife, but you must become a commander in chief for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul said, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." Um, and this approach, we're going to see later on when it comes to David. We're going to hear more about sending people into battle so that they will get killed. But this was the first plot, and David, of course, came back, but Saul had already given his daughter Nadab in marriage. So his other daughter, Malchel, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Why did it please them? Because Saul had another way to do away with David. And Saul said, "Thus you shall say to David." Okay, now the concern here, David was being very humble. And he said, I, you know, how can it be that I can be the son in law of a king? Because he was poor, and he had no dowry. And that, of course, was very significant, that you had to give the father of the bride a dowry. And um, so David, very humbly said, I really can't do this. So this is why King Saul said this, um, so that he could have Malchel, Saul's daughter. The king does not desire any dowry, but 200 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of his enemies. But King Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Now, wherefore David arose and went out, he and his men, and slew 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins and gave them to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Malchir, his daughter, to wife. And King Saul failed again to get rid of David. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Malchil, Saul's daughter, loved David exceedingly. And Saul was still the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy henceforth. Okay, so we're going to stop there, for tonight, and I think, wait a minute. Okay, and so we're going to talk about what was God's role in all of this, and I have this again, back in chapter 16, when it said, "And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward." And of course, we have again with this, And of course, we have again here that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Okay, and an evil spirit. But the one we're going to focus on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. Now, hold on just a minute. I've got to go back here. Okay, so when we're talking about God's God's role in all of this, we're going back here to what George had read, and David was playing the harp for King Saul. And remember, David loved King Saul. I mean, he was very devoted to King Saul and whatnot. And so here he was playing the harp, and all of a sudden, two javelins are thrown by Saul, but David evaded it. So think about God's role in this. Think about the um, the Spirit of the Lord came over David and stayed. So that's God's presence played a role there. And then when we got to these, David went out to battle, and he never he came back uh, without a problem, and he he was always confident. But let's think about this. We have to wonder, when King Saul threw the javelins at him, David must have had a little concern. Probably had some fear, but still he held on to his faith. He was still in the the presence of God, because when it said the Spirit of the Lord came over him, it means he was in God's presence. And so up to this point, he has not been injured, and he has escaped King Saul's plots to kill him. Okay, and so I just went to talk about divine protection, because David, David had that divine protection. And if we go back to 18:14, and David was a man of understanding in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. So I just pulled this thing. I pulled this divine protection out of it's Dr. Erico's book, but because it just came to me, and Psalm 91:1 says, "He who dwells in the protection of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty," and that is clearly referencing what was going on with David here. He had the divine protection. And then we always have to go back to Jesus' teachings, because we have to remember that Jesus came to fulfill the law of the Torah and the Mosaic laws, and he told us about this presence of God, okay, that was there in the Old Testament. And so when Jesus said, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is coming near, that's what he's talking about, and that's what was guiding David, and that's what was protecting him. So those who know God's guiding presence fear no evil doer or calamity. Fear has a difficult time gripping and clutching our hearts as we continue to realize and rest in the assuring presence of God. All right. Oh, sorry about that. That's a repeat, but let's look this Matthew 4:17. I kind of edited a bit here. From that time, Jesus began to preach and to say, now repent. Remember, in Aramaic, repent means turn to God. For the kingdom, and once again, we have that word, Malkutha, and it means counsel of heaven, or heaven and God are used interchangeably. So it's coming near. So we have Jesus preaching from the gospel, and certainly David at this point is a really good example. Okay, as we continually make our home in God, and as we constantly live in the Spirit of truth and love, we find ourselves protected wherever we are. The only sure and secure place to live is in a God-centered life in the Spirit. Okay, and so we go to a big thank you for contributions, and a little, just a little discussion. Hopefully you might have some comments or discussion or whatever. And so realizing that Jesus, and what we just read from the Gospels, realizing that Jesus taught us, it's not just David as a special person in the Bible or any other like really special person. That's what we make the mistake of looking and say, well, yeah, but David, I mean, he was a king and da da da. I mean, that couldn't apply to me. And it's the same way with Jesus' teachings. Because most traditional people don't teach the Spirit of God, and they don't teach that God is spirit, and so they kind of miss the idea about the divine protection, and that that we, little o me or little o you or whatever, could have this divine protection in the presence of God. And so I'm going to just leave that up to you, and I'll stop the share now.